Dante Romano, a feared mafia boss from Newark, was used to betrayal, but not like this. One night, a woman spills soup on his lap, ruins his dinner, saves his life. Her name? Ava Moraine, not a waitress, a scientist. The mind behind a stolen cure, now worth billions, and the target of a deadly conspiracy. Together, a man built on crime and a woman erased by power are forced to trust each other. What begins with a broken bowl becomes a war against betrayal, lies, and everything they once believed in. Stay with us to witness how a mafia empire crumbles and a new kind of family begins. Danny Romano sat at his usual table in the back of Cascata, a tucked-away Italian restaurant in Hoboken that didn't take reservations but always had a spot open for him. It wasn't the food that brought him back, though the minestrone was decent. It was the predictability, the silence, the ownership of routine. People didn't look Danny in the eyes here, and he liked that. Tonight, though, something felt off. The waitress was new. She looked too educated to be there, too aware of her surroundings. Her hands weren't clumsy, but she played clumsy like a violinist fakes a wrong note, deliberate, precise. She approached with his order, her mouth tight, shoulders tense, and just as she leaned in to place the soup on the table, she knocked the bowl hard, too hard for coincidence, spilling the steaming broth across the tablecloth and his lap. The burn didn't reach him, his reflexes still worked, but his instincts flared hotter than the soup ever could. She didn't apologize. She didn't flinch. She grabbed a napkin, and as she dabbed the mess away, she slipped it toward him, eyes down, lips pressed tight. When he opened it, one sentence stared back like a slap in the face. "Someone wants you dead. I know what they put in the soup." Danny didn't move, didn't blink. His first instinct was to laugh. Paranoia came with the territory, and warnings like this were usually cheap theater, cries for attention. But there was something in her stillness, something in the way she didn't look at him, that unsettled him more than the message itself. He glanced toward the kitchen. No unusual faces. No frantic chefs peeking through the swinging door. The place was running like always, background chatter, cutlery, the soft clink of glasses. The world hadn't noticed. That alone made the threat more credible. He folded the napkin slowly, slid it into his coat pocket, and leaned back in his chair, watching the woman as she disappeared toward the bar. Not a stumble in her stride now. No overacted fluster. She didn't look back. That's what caught him, not the warning. Not even the idea that someone might be coming for him. He'd lived with that shadow since his 20s. No, it was that she knew something, and she wanted him to understand it without spectacle. That was rare, that was dangerous, and that was why he didn't call in his guys waiting outside, not yet. When she returned 10 minutes later, carrying nothing, Danny was still sitting in the same spot, his pants still damp with broth, and his mind looping scenarios faster than bullets in a magazine. She stopped just shy of the table, not close enough to whisper, not far enough to ignore. "You okay?" she asked, flat voice, deadpan tone, as if she hadn't just ruined his meal or dropped a potential death sentence on a napkin. He nodded once. "Soup's not my favorite anyway." She almost smiled at that, and in that half-formed curve of her lips, he read something important, relief maybe, or regret. Or it passed quickly. "They'll think it worked," she said. "You should let them." His fingers twitched toward his coat, toward the message tucked inside. He wanted to demand answers, names, dates. But something about the way she stood there, rigid, ready to run, made him pause. This wasn't about extraction, it was about preservation. Hers, possibly his. "You're gonna have to give me more than this," he said, voice low. "Not here," she replied, "and not if you bring anyone with you." "Udim." Then she walked away again, disappearing into the kitchen as if she'd been working there for years. Danny left without finishing his drink. That never happened. Outside, his driver raised an eyebrow, but Danny waved him off. "I'll walk," he muttered, even though it was freezing and he had nowhere particular to go. He just needed air, clarity. He walked 2 blocks, turned into an alley he knew well, lit a cigarette he no longer smoked and thought. He'd built a life on knowing who to trust and when to strike. This was different. This was new. If the soup had been poisoned, and he was now almost sure it had, then Ava Moraine, or whatever her real name was, had just crossed a line few dared approach. She had intervened, not for leverage, not for money, not even, as far as he could tell, to blackmail him. She had done it to stop something. And that kind of move coming from a stranger was more terrifying than a barrel pointed to his head. He wasn't used to being saved, not by anyone, not without a cost. He pulled the napkin out again, under the yellow wash of a flickering street lamp. The handwriting was clean, unshaken, the message short and irreversible. Someone wants you dead. Obvious. That came with the business. But the second part, I know what they put in the soup, was specific. That meant knowledge, access, maybe even guilt. That changed everything. That made her dangerous, not in the way people like Kincaid or Sal DeLuca were dangerous, but in the way fire looks harmless until it burns your house down. He couldn't afford this. He couldn't ignore it either. And more than that, some stubborn, rusted piece of his conscience that hadn't moved in years was telling him not to walk away from this. Not yet. Maybe it was the fact that she hadn't asked him for protection. Maybe it was because she hadn't begged him for help. She had simply acted decisively, like someone who once believed in something and had it stolen. Back at the restaurant, the staff pretended nothing had happened. The table was cleared, the cloth replaced, and Ava was nowhere in sight. She hadn't returned to the floor, hadn't clocked out, hadn't answered when the manager asked where she'd gone. Danny stood at the threshold a few minutes longer than necessary, scanning every face, searching for a reason to doubt what he'd just lived. He found none. Just like that, she was gone. But the echo of her words, the weight of that note, and the burn that hadn't reached his skin lingered. That night everything shifted. Not because someone had tried to poison him, that was old news, but because someone had stopped it. Quietly, risking everything. A stranger. A woman who should have stayed invisible. And as he walked away from the door, his fingers clenched around the napkin in his pocket, Dante Romano understood something he hadn't felt in a long time. He had no idea who she was, but she wasn't lying. Danny found her standing alone by the curb under a dim streetlight, clutching a crumpled envelope like it held the last thread of her identity. Ava didn't notice him at first. Her gaze was fixed on something inside the envelope, her expression caught somewhere between fury and exhaustion. Danny approached slowly, hands in his coat pockets, unsure of what to say or even what he was looking for. Part of him still thought she might be playing him. Some long con, some planted warning to provoke paranoia. But when he stepped close enough to see the contents of the envelope, pages filled with scribbled chemical notations, formula drafts, and a snapped lab badge with her face half scratched out, he felt that flicker of instinct that had kept him alive all these years twist in a new direction. "That yours?" he asked, voice low but not threatening. Ava didn't look up. "What's left of it?" she replied, fingers trembling slightly despite her composed stance. Danny reached for the badge, but she pulled it back. "Don't touch it," she said sharply, then softened. "It's the only thing that still has my name on it. Everything else, they took." Danny wasn't a man who asked for stories. He didn't believe in them. In his world, you either proved what you claimed or you paid the price for lying. But something about the way Ava held herself, wounded but not broken, afraid but not retreating, compelled him to ask, "Who are they?" Her jaw clenched. She pulled out a folded page, yellowed and torn at the edges. "Northbridge Therapeutics. You've heard of them, I'm sure. Market cap in the billions. Drug of the decade. They call it NRX-17. They say it's theirs. It isn't." She handed him the page. It was a chemical structure, hand-drawn. signed at the bottom in faded ink, a Moran. They erased my name from the patent, from the research database, even from the internal logs. NDA'd me into silence and blackballed me from every lab I ever worked in. When I spoke up, they sent people. Lawyers mostly, then others. Danny didn't flinch. You're telling me that Soup was about this? Ava nodded. You were the easiest way to tie off a loose end. You're a liability to them now. You've seen me. There was a silence between them, thick but not awkward, an understanding building in the gaps between words. Danny folded the page and handed it back. You don't look like someone who folds easy, he said. I did, Ava answered quietly. They made sure of it. I lost everything. My lab, my apartment, my name. I've been working jobs I'm overqualified for just to survive, but when I saw your name on the reservation tonight, I knew they weren't finished cleaning up. You and we were never supposed to meet. That Soup wasn't meant to miss. Danny's jaw tightened. The weight of her words hit different now. She wasn't trying to manipulate him. She wasn't after money. She just didn't want to disappear completely. What do you want from me? He asked. Protection? Revenge? She shook her head. I want to be heard. That's it. Just once. I want someone who doesn't owe them anything to listen. Danny stared at her, then at the envelope, and then back again. I don't owe them, he said, but I don't owe you either. I know, she said, but you're still standing here. For a moment, he considered walking away, leaving her there in the cold, with her folder full of ashes and her past in pieces. But something inside him, some faded echo of the boy who once wanted to be more than a name in police files, stopped him. Ava's story rang too close to the truths he'd buried beneath years of loyalty, violence, and quiet regret. He had seen people erased before, names taken off walls, voices scrubbed from records, lives rewritten by whoever had more lawyers or more bullets. But this was different. This was personal. And she hadn't flinched when she warned him. That mattered. You said you didn't want revenge, Danny said slowly, eyes narrowing. But if they're willing to kill for this, it's not going to end with you being heard. You understand that, right? Ava met his gaze for the first time, steady and clear. I don't expect you to fix it, but you saw it, and now you know. That's enough for me. Danny exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. Yeah, well, knowing things tends to get people like me killed. Ava smiled, but it wasn't joy. It was survival. Then maybe you understand a little more about what I lost, she said. The truth doesn't care about who gets hurt, Danny. But silence always hurts the same people. He hated how right she was. Hated how her words dug into places he'd sealed off with concrete and blood. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't fragile. She was a woman who'd been broken and chose to keep going anyway. That made her a threat to the kind of men who lived in rooms Danny had long since stopped entering. All right, he said finally, brushing his hand down his coat. I'll listen. Once, that's all I promise. Once is all I need, Ava replied. Everything else is just survival. He nodded, then looked away, unsure of what the hell he'd just agreed to. He didn't do conscience. He didn't do mercy. But something about this wasn't business. Not yet, not exactly. And as she stood there again under that same flickering light, eyes still fixed on the torn envelope in her hand, Danny finally saw the full weight of her story without needing another word. She wasn't just a woman with a warning. She was the ghost of a life stolen, the author of a truth no one wanted printed, the name behind a cure that had saved millions but never saved her. She had been erased, yes, but not destroyed. Not yet. And in that final glance before they parted ways that night, Danny knew that whatever came next would not be about power or loyalty or the family code he'd lived by. It would be about this. About a woman whose name had been erased, but whose soul was still very much alive. Ava knew she shouldn't have come alone, but options had become scarce. She moved like a shadow between the rusted containers in South Boston's industrial maze, clutching a thumb drive in one hand and pepper spray in the other, more out of habit than hope. She had come to meet someone, a lab tech from Northbridge, who had promised to leak internal emails proving her authorship. But the contact never showed. Instead, she felt it before she saw it. The stillness, that sick instinct that something had gone wrong. Her body tensed a second before the first figure stepped out from behind a loading crate, gun in hand, face hidden behind a mask. Then another and another. Her feet froze. A voice barked her name, but it was distorted, mechanical, emotionless. She tried to run, ducking behind a shipping pallet, but she didn't make it far. The sound of a gun cocking echoed too close. "You don't scream," the voice said. "You don't beg. You just hand it over." She gripped the drive tighter, willing herself not to cry, not to give them that. But the fear was there, trembling under her skin, ready to spill. The man stepped closer, raising the pistol to her face with a casual authority that said he'd done this many times before. Ava's brain calculated escape routes, distances, but none of them worked. This wasn't a scare tactic. It was clean-up. She clenched the drive tighter, not out of defiance, but as a final act of identity. If they killed her, it would at least die in her hand. Her breath came out uneven, her back against the cold metal of the crate, the gun now inches from her eye. "This doesn't belong to you," the man said, voice lower now, almost smug. That's when a different sound interrupted, a sudden crack, sharp and final, and then the gun dropped to the ground, lifeless hand still attached. Ava blinked, not understanding. Blood sprayed across the crate beside her. The masked man dropped, a hole in his forehead, and another fell seconds later, this one clutching his throat. She heard the click of a second weapon, not from her attackers, but from behind them. A shadow stepped into the open. Dante Romano. Danny didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Ava watched in stunned silence as he moved with surgical precision, dropping the last of the attackers with a double tap that felt more like punctuation than aggression. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't chaotic. It was clinical, efficient. After the last body hit the ground, he turned toward her, still gripping the pistol, jaw tight, eyes burning with something unreadable. "You okay?" he asked, the words sharp but low. She nodded, unable to form a response. Her hands were shaking now, and she hated that he could see it. Danny stepped closer, eyes scanning the area. He didn't ask what she was doing there or who they were. He knew enough. "You're lucky I don't listen to my better judgment," he muttered, wiping blood off his knuckles with a rag pulled from his coat. Ava stared at the bodies, the pooling blood catching the reflection of security lights in a way that made her stomach flip. "I wasn't supposed to make it out," she said, more to herself than to him. "No," Danny replied. "But you did, and they didn't. Let's keep it that way." She stood slowly, legs still unsteady. Danny didn't offer his hand. He didn't coddle. That wasn't him. But he didn't walk away either. He stood a foot from her, gaze heavy, unreadable. Ava wanted to ask why he had come, how he'd found her, but the question died in her throat. He wasn't there because of obligation, not because of some strategic gain. There was something deeper and more complicated pushing him. Something even he probably didn't have the words for. She could feel it in the silence between them. A silence that wasn't awkward, but dense with what hadn't been said. She pressed the drive into her jacket pocket and looked at the blood on her hands. Danny noticed, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression faltered. Just a crack, barely perceptible, but enough. "You kill enough people, you stop thinking about the mess," he said. "But seeing it on someone else, that's when it hits." Ava nodded. "You've done this before." Danny's voice was distant. "Too many times to remember, and a few I'll never forget." He looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted between them. Not trust, not yet, but the start of understanding. They didn't speak again for a while. Ava crouched beside one of the bodies, picking up a small phone from the floor, scanning the last received message. Her breath caught. "They weren't freelancers," she said. "This came from someone with access to Northbridge security servers. These guys weren't just here to kill me, they were cleaning up evidence." Danny took the phone, glanced at the screen and pocketed it. "We'll deal with that later," he said. She didn't argue. There were more pressing things than revenge, like surviving the night. He started walking and she followed, silent steps through the graveyard of ambition and betrayal they'd just created. There was nothing left to say for now. The truth was becoming clearer with every body left behind. Whatever this was, it wasn't about justice anymore. It was about exposure. And neither of them could afford to let this go dark. At the edge of the dock, Ava slowed. Danny turned to her, confused. She reached out without thinking, touching his hand, still stained with blood, still warm from the heat of violence. He didn't pull away. That surprised her. For all his sharp edges and brutal history, for all the ways he carried power like a second skin, in that moment he let her touch him. Not romantically, not with fear, just acknowledgement. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask her to. But between them, something shifted. Ava saw not the feared capo of Newark, not the executioner who moved like a ghost in the dark, but a man carrying the weight of broken promises and a mother who wouldn't recognize him anymore. Danny saw not a liability, but a soul still fighting to matter. In the stillness of the dock, surrounded by bodies and unspoken truths, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Her fingers rested on his hand a moment longer. He let them. Danny didn't like computers. He never trusted anything that didn't bleed when you hit it. But tonight, he sat in front of a high-spec terminal inside a borrowed office space, hands steady, eyes scanning fast. Northbridge's architecture wasn't hard to break, not when you had money, contacts, and people who owed you favors. The hard part wasn't getting in. It was what he was looking for. Ava hadn't told him to do this. In fact, she hadn't wanted him involved at all. But after the docks, after the way her voice shook without ever breaking, Danny needed to see it himself, not a retelling, not another version, the truth. He navigated into the archives, ignored the top-level folders, marketing decks, redacted audits, polished reports, and dug deep into the root server logs, where nothing was meant to be touched. There, in the revisions of the NRX-17 trial data, he found it. Not once, not twice, but dozens of times. Ava Moraine, lead researcher. Her name had been there in black and white, digitally signed until it wasn't. The logs revealed edit chains. Someone inside had overwritten her credentials in each file, replacing her with anonymous placeholders and later with names of senior male executives. A silent erasure line by line. He stared at the code, at the subtle manipulations, date stamps doctored, user IDs spoofed, automated scripts that made the corruption look like ordinary updates. It was surgical, it was deliberate, and it made his stomach twist. This wasn't a case of someone stealing credit by mistake or oversight. This was an operation, executed internally, signed off. He leaned back in the chair, fists clenched, thinking of the way Ava had clutched her broken lab badge, the way her voice dropped when she said they took everything. Now he could see it, how cleanly they did it, like she had never existed. He downloaded the logs onto an encrypted drive and ejected it slowly, breathing through the tension building in his chest. Danny had buried men for less. But this wasn't something he could fix with a gun. No one would believe her just because he did. He needed something more. Something that couldn't be erased with a keystroke. He stood, jaw locked, the weight of this quiet theft pressing down harder than any street betrayal. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. Not because he lacked leverage, but because the truth had been hidden so well it might never matter. Later, back at the safe house, Ava was waiting. She sat on a worn leather chair in silence, a stack of loose papers on her lap and something gripped in her hand. She didn't ask what he found. She didn't need to. Danny placed the drive on the table between them and sat across from her. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. He watched her thumb brush the edge of a frayed notebook, the pages yellowed and folded from years of being carried around like contraband. "I saw it," he said finally. "Your name, dozens of times, then gone." She looked up, eyes tired but dry. "That formula changed lives," she said, not with pride, but with something quieter. "But I was never in the story. They erased me before the first press release even came out." She handed him the notebook. Inside were raw notes, sketches of molecular structures, trials and failures scrawled in the margins. Real work. The kind of mess no one could fake. "I wrote every version by hand before uploading," she said. "That's the only reason I have this. They couldn't delete what they didn't see." Danny flipped through the pages slowly. They weren't just data, they were proof of her soul. When he reached the torn part near the end, he paused. A single page was missing, ripped clean, but not by accident. "Where's the rest?" he asked. Ava reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the missing piece, folded into a tiny square. She handed it to him like it was a piece of herself. "This was in my locker when they fired me. I tore it out before they confiscated everything. I don't even know why I did it. Just instinct." Danny unfolded it carefully. It was a page of structural revisions, early ones, handwritten and signed with a date. The date matched one of the logs he'd found. He exhaled sharply, the final line connecting. This buries them," he said. "It's not enough for court," she replied, "but it's enough to start something." Danny nodded slowly, a rare kind of respect growing in his silence. She had fought for this alone for too long. And now that he'd seen what they did to her, he couldn't unsee it. The woman who warned him with a napkin in a restaurant wasn't just a survivor, she was a creator, a witness to her own theft. And finally, he understood why silence had cost her so much. He leaned forward and placed the torn page back inside the notebook, pressing it against the seam where it belonged. "They tried to erase you," he said quietly, "but you're still here." Ava didn't respond with gratitude or validation. She just looked at him for a long moment and said, "It was never about being seen. I just didn't want to disappear." Those words sat between them like a verdict. Danny thought about his own past, how many people he'd helped disappear, how many truths he'd rewritten with violence or bribery. And yet here he was, sitting with a woman who had done none of that, and still been erased just the same. He stood, pacing for a second, then stopped himself. "We'll make them see it," he said, "even if they pretend they don't." Ava gave a small nod, but her hands never let go of the notebook. "They'll come after this," she said, "after us." Danny picked up the drive again, slipping it into his inner pocket. "Then we give them a reason to run first." She didn't smile. Neither did he. But something settled in both of them. A pact made not with promises, but with evidence and shared pain. And as Ava sat quietly again, thumbing the edge of that tattered notebook, one hand over the stitched spine and the other still curled protectively around the torn page, now back in place, Danny realized something he hadn't allowed himself to admit out loud. Her name wasn't just in the formula. It was in every line, every correction, every scrawled frustration on the margin of a page she refused to throw away. They had removed her name from the database, but they had failed to erase her from the truth. And as he watched her curl the notebook close to her chest like armor, something tightened in his throat. Her name had always been there, in the research, in the cure. And now, without fully understanding how or why, it was in him too. Danny had known Sal DeLuca since he was 16. Back then, Sal was the man who handed him his first burner phone, showed him how to read people, how to lie without flinching. Over the years, Sal became more than a consigliere. He was family, a bloodless brother who never needed to be asked twice. But trust like that can rot slowly, without anyone noticing the smell until it's too late. Danny felt it first as a murmur, a gut pull he couldn't explain. Then came the confirmation, a coded voicemail intercepted from a burner Danny didn't recognize, a name spoken too casually on the wrong side of the line. Kincaid. Declan Kincaid. Boston's ghost, and Danny's oldest rival. Danny confronted Sal face to face, behind closed doors, in the basement of an old butcher shop they'd used for years to plan moves. "Tell me it's not true," Danny said, voice low, eyes sharp, but not yet cruel. Sal didn't blink. He just said, "It was always going to come to this." That was the moment Danny knew it was real, not a rumor, not misdirection. The betrayal was right there, in Sal's voice, calm, certain, cold. Sal didn't deny it, didn't even flinch. "You're letting a woman undo everything we built," he said. "A scientist, a nobody. She's a target, Danny. She's not the mission." Danny stood still, fists tight, jaw locked. "She's not the mission, huh?" he repeated, almost like he was tasting the words. "You mean the mission where we sell out to the one guy who'd burn Jersey for a photo op?" Sal shrugged. "It's consolidation. Kincaid has reach, you have weight. He offered control of the family, full backing. All it cost was her." Danny stepped closer. "So the soup, that was you?" Silence answered before Sal did. "You were getting sloppy, emotional. I did what I had to do." That made something inside Danny rupture. The betrayal wasn't just tactical, it was personal. "You made me a target in my own city." Sal's face tightened. "I protected the structure." "You forgot what we are." "No," Danny said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You forgot who I am." When Danny told Ava, he expected rage, screaming maybe, accusations. Instead, she stood still. Her breath hitched, but her eyes stayed locked on his. "You knew," she said. Danny tried to speak, but she cut him off. "Not everything, but something. You felt it, and you didn't stop it." Her voice cracked just slightly at the edges, and a single tear slid down her cheek, not from sadness, but from fury. The soup, the surveillance, the pressure. It was never just Northbridge. He made me a mark, and you let me sit across from him like I was safe. Danny didn't deny it. He couldn't. I thought I could fix it before it hit you. I was wrong." Ava stared at him for a long moment, then simply said, "You didn't stop it." And that hurt more than if she'd yelled. That restraint, that quiet betrayal in her eyes, it burned. Danny found Sal again that night, same basement. This time he didn't come to talk. He came to end it, but not with bullets. That would have been too easy. He stripped Sal of his titles, cut his access, let every capo know that DeLuca was out, not in secret, not with ceremony, just out. Effective immediately. The move shook the entire family. It wasn't just a power play, it was a message. Loyalty meant nothing without truth. As Sal stood across from him, disbelief giving way to anger, Danny said only one thing. "I don't work with traitors. I bury them." Sal left without a word, his legacy unraveling behind him. Danny didn't watch him go. He just lit a cigarette with shaking hands, knowing what he'd done wasn't clean, but it was necessary. Later, back at the safe house, Ava didn't ask what happened. She saw it in his eyes. The tension, the void left by a man he once trusted more than himself. She didn't comfort him. That wasn't their language. Instead, she placed the notebook between them on the table again, open to the same torn page he'd helped restore. "So now what?" she asked, voice calm but heavy. Danny stared at it, then at her. "Now we hit them back. No more middlemen, no more silence." Ava nodded once. No forgiveness, no apology. Just alignment. For the first time, they weren't just surviving together. They were choosing to stand together. What they'd lost, Sal, trust, safety, was real, but so was what they had left. And as the silence settled again between them, Ava wiped her cheeks and looked at him, truly looked, no illusions, no shield. "You knew," she repeated one last time, softer now. Danny didn't argue. "Yeah," he said, "but I made the right choice, even if it was late." She didn't say thank you. He didn't ask her to, but when she closed the notebook, her fingers brushed his, and this time she didn't pull away. He had chosen her, not just in words, but in action, and that was something neither of them would forget. Danny hadn't been back to his mother's house in over a year, and walking through the creaky front door felt like stepping into a memory he had both missed and abandoned. The place hadn't changed. The same photos lined the walls, the same faint smell of basil clung to the kitchen, but the weight in the air was different. Not hostile, just cautious. Rosa Romano, small in stature, but immense in presence, stood in the doorway with a look that said she already knew more than she should. She didn't question why her son appeared without warning, or why the woman beside him had eyes too alert to be a guest. She simply nodded, stepped aside and said, "The kettle's already on." Ava hadn't expected warmth, much less kindness. But when Rosa pressed a mug of chamomile tea into her hands and said nothing else, Ava felt something shift deep inside, something that had been locked down for years. They didn't speak at first, not about formulas or danger or betrayals. They just sat. Danny hovered in the corner, unsure whether to stay or give them space, but Ava barely noticed. For once, she wasn't preparing to run. They sat across from each other in Rosa's small kitchen, a faded floral tablecloth between them, as Ava held the warm mug in both hands. Rosa didn't ask who she was. She didn't ask why they were there. She didn't have to. There was something intuitive about her, as if she read people like cookbooks, by the stains on the pages and the notes scribbled in the margins. Ava had been on the run so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to be treated without suspicion. Rosa refilled her cup, then reached for Ava's coat, hanging on the back of the chair. "You should patch this," she said casually, fingering a tear in the lining. And that's when she felt something crinkled inside the seam. Her fingers paused. She looked up at Ava, who froze. "It's just..." Ava began, but Rosa had already pulled it free. A folded page, yellowed and soft at the corners. She opened it gently, carefully, like it was fragile scripture. And there it was, the formula. Handwritten, annotated, signed. Rosa didn't say a word for several seconds. Then she looked up at Ava, her eyes sharper than ever. "You made this?" Ava nodded, unsure what to expect. "It saved lives," Rosa said, "including my own." Ava stared at her, stunned. "You took NRX-17, she asked, her voice cracking from disbelief. Rosa nodded once. "Stage 3 breast cancer, 2 years ago. I couldn't afford the full treatment, but I was enrolled in a trial through the clinic. It worked." Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. Ava looked down at her own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. The very hands that had been treated like a threat, like a liability, had saved this woman's life, and she hadn't even known. "You're telling me..." Ava began, but her voice broke off. She couldn't finish the thought. Rosa reached across the table, laying a warm, steady hand over hers. "You saved my son the night you spilled that soup," she said gently. "But you saved me before you even knew who I was. Now let's return the favor. Let's save someone else." Ava's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She blinked fast, holding back tears, not out of shame, but out of the sheer force of the moment. She had never expected gratitude. She had never even dared hope for recognition. But Rosa's words were something else entirely. They were belonging. Danny watched it all from the doorway, silent. He hadn't told Ava about his mother's illness. He hadn't told Rosa the truth about Ava's past. And yet, somehow, They had found each other on their own terms. It was a moment he didn't belong in, but needed to witness. For years, he had been the fixer, the enforcer, the protector. But here, in this quiet kitchen with no strategy, no weapons, and no guards, he was just a son. And Ava wasn't just a witness to the cure. She was the cure. Seeing Rosa hold that torn page, the one Ava had hidden and guarded like a wounded part of herself, Danny realized what he could never give her with money or vengeance: acknowledgement. That page didn't just prove her authorship, it proved her existence. "It was in my coat the whole time," Ava said, voice still hushed. "I almost forgot it was there." Rosa smiled softly. "The things we carry without knowing," she replied. Then she took the page and placed it between the pages of a cookbook on the counter. "Safe now, until you're ready to show the world." Ava didn't speak after that. She couldn't. There was too much inside her to turn into words. She just sat there, soaking in the warmth of the tea, the quiet presence of a woman who owed her life to something she'd created in isolation, and the silent figure of Danny leaning in the doorway, like a man trying to memorize a moment. In this small room, everything was still. The chase, the fear, the fight. It was suspended, if only for a few precious minutes. She felt no shame, no need to defend herself. She didn't have to beg to be believed or explain what had been taken from her. Rosa had seen enough, had felt enough. And in the space between their locked eyes, Ava felt something deeper than understanding. She felt acceptance, a kind of welcome she hadn't known she craved. The page had been there all along, but here was the first time it felt safe. And as Ava tucked the coat back around her shoulders, fingers grazing the now empty seam where the missing page had lived for years, she looked at Rosa and then at Danny. Neither one speaking, both waiting. She nodded once, no longer out of caution, but with something steadier, something earned. She belonged here. Not because she'd proven anything, not because she'd survived, but because for the first time in years, someone had seen the whole of her and said, "Stay." And in that single gesture, Rosa's hand over hers, her words echoing in her chest, Ava felt it. Home wasn't a place. It was this moment, this woman, this choice. She had saved someone, and someone had finally saved her back. Danny never imagined walking into a federal building without a weapon or a threat. For years, places like this were enemy territory, rooms where men like him either kept their mouths shut or never walked out. But this time, he came through the front door with a purpose heavier than a gun. He asked for Assistant U.S. Attorney Jordan Whitaker by name and was made to wait. When Whitaker finally arrived, he didn't offer a handshake. He knew who Danny was. Everyone did. "What are you doing here, Mr. Romano?" Whitaker asked, his tone carefully measured. Danny placed a black leather folder on the table between them. "I came to trade." Whitaker raised an eyebrow. "Trade what?" "Everything," Danny said. "The ledgers, the offshore accounts, the ghost companies, Kincaid's payouts, Northbridge's laundering contracts. Even names inside your department that took a cut." There was silence then, taut and unreal. Danny waited. He wasn't bluffing. This was his empire. Years of blood and concrete. And he was offering it up like a condemned man handing over his last cigarette. "And what do you want in return?" Whitaker asked slowly. Danny opened the folder to reveal the notebook. "Immunity," he said, "for her and for me." Whitaker didn't respond immediately. He reached for the notebook with suspicion, flipping through the pages without understanding what he was holding, until he reached the final section, the torn page, reattached with tape, the signatures, the dates. Then he stopped. "Where did you get this?" Danny's voice didn't waver. "She made it. She saved your people. You just didn't know it." The prosecutor kept flipping, and as he did, Danny leaned forward slightly. "I don't care if you hate me. I probably deserve it. But this woman, she doesn't. She never played this game. She just tried to finish what she started. Whitaker closed the notebook slowly, resting his hand on top of it. "You're serious about this? You'll testify?" "Whatever you need," Danny said. "I'll burn everything down myself if that's the price." That was when Whitaker really looked at him, eyes narrowing, not to judge but to understand. He saw something in Danny he didn't expect, not manipulation, not desperation. Regret, the kind that came late and honest. "Why now?" Whitaker asked. Danny hesitated, then said, "Because I've buried too many people trying to protect lies. I'm done protecting the wrong ones." The paperwork was thick, the language clinical, the terms sharp as knives. Immunity deals never came without blood. And this one carved through him like none before. Danny signed on every line. Each pen stroke stripped away a piece of what he had built. Territory, influence, legacy. What had taken decades to amass evaporated with a signature and a handshake. But he didn't flinch. He didn't ask for leniency. He didn't ask to keep a dime. All he asked was that Ava be left out of it. No trial, no press. Her name removed from every report. She had saved lives. Now she deserved her own. When the final signature was in place, Whitaker stood and left the room, clutching the notebook like it was a live wire. Danny sat alone for a few minutes more. Not because he needed to, but because he couldn't stand just yet. Something in him had shifted. It wasn't grief. It was surrender, not to the government, not to the law, but to the truth, the real kind, the kind that demands payment with no receipt. When he finally stepped outside, the cold air hit him like a slap. He didn't speak, he didn't look back. The steps leading down from the federal building had never seemed so long, but at the bottom, Ava was waiting. She stood just off to the side, wrapped in the same worn coat, notebook clutched tightly in her arms. She didn't ask what happened. She had felt it before he even appeared. His shoulders lower, his hands trembling just enough to betray him. She could tell from his eyes that it was done. And she knew, because the weight he carried now was different, not anger, not vengeance, but grief for the part of him he had finally let go. She didn't speak, just fell into step beside him as he walked past. No questions, no praise, only presence, the kind that mattered more than words. They walked 2 blocks in silence. A cab passed, then another. People moved around them, unaware that a man had just dismantled an empire, not with violence, but with a signature. Danny wiped his face once, quickly, like brushing away dust, but Ava saw it. The tears, not many, just enough. Enough to matter, enough to show that, after everything, something inside him still worked. She didn't stop walking. She didn't try to hold his hand. She just stayed beside him, step for step. That was all he needed. That was everything. And as they turned the corner, away from the courthouse and into whatever would come next, Danny didn't say a word. Neither did she. But in that silence, something new had taken root. Not redemption, not yet, but the first quiet breath of it. The deal had gutted him, shattered his legacy, torn him down to a man with nothing left to offer but the truth, and somehow that was enough. Ava looked at him once, her eyes soft, unreadable. He didn't meet her gaze. He couldn't, but she kept walking with him anyway. Ava sat alone at the plaintiff's table in the Chancery Court of Delaware, her palms flat against a stack of documents that had nearly cost her everything. Across the aisle, Trevor Hale reclined in his tailored suit with the smug stillness of a man who believed the world still belonged to him. His lawyers whispered, shuffled files, postured, but Trevor didn't bother. When his eyes met hers, they were the same eyes from every conference room she'd once entered unnoticed, polished, dismissive, practiced in pretending she wasn't there. She remembered how he used to refer to her work as raw data, never as research, never as hers. Today, though, she wasn't hiding behind a lab coat or a silent NDA. Today, she had voice, documents, and time on her side. When the judge called her to testify, she stood, not with bravado, but with the kind of quiet steadiness that came from knowing the truth had weight. As she began, her voice didn't shake. She showed the altered research logs. She presented the physical notebook with the original handwritten formula. And when she opened the folder Danny had handed her weeks ago, the one with the log history and metadata audit trail, the room changed. The judge, a seasoned arbiter who had heard 1,000 versions of corporate betrayal, leaned forward as Ava outlined the timeline of the data theft. She pointed to the dates, to the user IDs masked in revision logs, to the names of Northbridge executives who had digitally replaced her initials with their own. Then, she handed over the printed copies of the earliest trial drafts, versions no longer present in Northbridge's systems, but pulled from Danny's backdoor extraction, each one showing her name in the footer, A. Moraine. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Trevor had stopped his sideways smirking. His lawyer objected, but it was half-hearted, because even he knew what this meant. The judge lifted the pages and scanned the signatures. Dr. Moraine, are you asserting that this is your original intellectual property? Ava nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. And that I was systematically erased from the record to monetize it under names that came after me. The judge didn't offer a reaction, not visibly, but he placed the copies down with unusual care. And these records support your claim, he said, more as a conclusion than a question. Ava didn't respond. She didn't have to. The paper did the talking now. In the back of the courtroom, Danny remained still, sitting alone, dressed like a contractor or a quiet consultant. No one recognized him. He made sure of that. But he watched every second with his hands folded and eyes locked on Ava. He saw the moment Trevor leaned back ever so slightly, not in arrogance this time, but in retreat. He saw the tremble in Ava's fingers as she passed over her notebook, and the way she steadied herself without needing help. And when the judge closed the session with a firm statement acknowledging her as the original contributor to the NRX-17 compound, pending further action on damages, Danny exhaled. Not relief, but something harder. Release. A wrong had not been undone, but it had been seen. That mattered. Ava didn't win a fortune that day. She didn't want one. What she won was space in history, and in a world where people like her were routinely deleted, that meant everything. Outside the courtroom, Ava didn't rush. She walked with her back straight and her head level, each step a reclamation of her own name. The journalists waiting by the stairs barely recognized her. None of them expected a woman like that to be behind a blockbuster formula. She gave no interviews, just kept walking, gripping her notebook like armor. Danny waited in the corridor by the emergency exit, hands in his coat pockets, watching her come toward him. She slowed, unsure of what he would say, or if he would say anything at all. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he pulled an envelope from his coat and handed it to her wordlessly. Inside, Ava found the official incorporation forms. A foundation, non-profit, trademarked. Moraine Rosa Foundation, access for all. Her name, his mother's name, no corporate owners, no royalty structures. Just free, replicable medical access written into the charter. She stared at the papers, then at him. Her mouth opened, but the words wouldn't form. It's yours, Danny said. All of it. You decide who gets what. No one can erase it this time. Ava didn't answer immediately. Her hands shook as she held the envelope. Not out of fear, but out of the quiet shock of being honored instead of ignored. She looked back toward the courtroom door, then at him. You could have put your name on it too, she whispered. Danny shook his head. That's not the name that saved my mother, or me. She nodded slowly, and for a long moment they said nothing more. Nothing needed to be said. And as she stepped beside him, just like she had outside the federal building, Danny fell in step. No guards, No titles, just a man who gave up everything to make space for someone who had never been given anything. And a woman who, for the first time in her life, no longer had to fight to be seen. Danny's name no longer meant what it used to. The phone stopped ringing. His allies, the ones who once toasted him in mahogany-paneled back rooms, vanished without a word. Some ran, others were taken down in the federal sweep that followed his confession. A few were smart enough to turn state's witness before he could. The empire he'd built, brick by bloody brick, dissolved almost overnight. No more crews, no more drop points, no more bags of silence traded in the dark. And yet, he didn't fight to reclaim any of it. He let it go with the same brutal precision he once used to protect it, not out of guilt. He had lived with guilt too long to pretend it was new, but out of something harder to name. Maybe it was clarity, maybe it was fatigue. Or maybe, deep down, he knew that Ava had done something no capo, no contract, no blood oath ever had. She made him believe there was something else on the other side of power. He didn't need to win anymore. He just needed somewhere to stand, somewhere to stay. That place, unexpectedly, was a modest community center in the ironbound district of Newark, built on the ashes of his past and on the bones of something gentler. He never said it out loud, but it was Rosa who led the way. It had been her idea to convert the old warehouse into classrooms and kitchens, to call in volunteers, to clear out the rusted shelves and repaint the walls. Ava didn't hesitate when Rosa asked her to help. She didn't come as a favor to Danny or as some form of charity. She came because she meant it. Every day, she showed up in jeans and a ponytail, teaching local kids how to read lab results, run safe chemical experiments, ask real questions. She didn't try to impress them. She listened to them. She didn't wear her history like armor. She wore it like a scar that had closed but never faded, and they saw her, really saw her. Not as the woman who fought a corporation, but as someone who had once been invisible and chose not to stay that way. Rosa handled the kitchen. She didn't let anyone else near the stove, not even Danny. Her soups became something of a legend, always hot, always full of herbs, always free. The kids joked about sopa milagrosa when they got sick, and Rosa would just roll her eyes, pretending not to enjoy the nickname. The only thing she refused to joke about was poison. Every batch was tasted twice, personally. Every bowl poured with care. "No one gets taken out under my roof," she told Danny once, with a pointed glance that carried more forgiveness than he deserved. Ava helped her sometimes, but only with chopping. The two of them didn't need to talk much anymore. They'd already said what mattered. Danny cleaned the tables, quietly. No one asked him to, no one expected it, but he came every day with a rag and a rhythm, wiping down surfaces after the last bowl was scraped clean. He never led meetings, never gave speeches. He didn't want to be seen. He just wanted to be useful. One afternoon, long after the kids had left and the pots were washed, Ava pinned something to the back wall near the entrance. A single photo. No fanfare, no announcement, just a snapshot of the three of them. Ava, Rosa, and Danny standing in front of the center on opening day. They weren't posing, they were laughing, caught mid-smile, mid-something real. Beneath the frame, Ava wrote a simple sentence in her own handwriting, in a pen that bled slightly on the paper. "Healing begins when someone chooses to stay." Danny saw it that night as he turned off the lights. He stood in front of it longer than he meant to, his hand resting just under the glass. He didn't cry. Not this time. He didn't need to. Because the photo said what he never could, that he was no longer just a shadow in someone else's story. He was part of a beginning, one he didn't orchestrate, one he didn't control, but one he had finally chosen. And that choice, to stay, to clean tables, to walk alongside the woman whose life had once been reduced to a footnote, became its own kind of redemption. Not dramatic, not public, just consistent, real. He didn't wear suits anymore. didn't carry weapons. The only power he held now was the quiet kind, the ability to show up, to listen, to make room. And that was enough. More than he ever thought he'd deserve. The past didn't vanish. It never would. But here, in this place built on survival and second chances, it didn't define him. It was just a part of the story, not the whole. Ava still called him Danny, but sometimes, when she looked at him over the heads of the kids, she smiled in a way that said she saw the man beneath the legacy. And that was enough, too. So when someone asked one day if this was his place, Danny just shook his head and smiled. "No," he said, "it's theirs." Then he returned to wiping down the last table, just as he always did, the hum of a clean ending in his chest. And on the wall behind him, that photo stayed, proof that what remains when everything else falls is what you choose to hold on to. And Danny Romano had finally chosen. We put a lot of care and heart into creating each of these stories, always thinking of you who watch and connect with us. If this one touched you, subscribing to our channel means more than you can imagine. It helps us bring more meaningful stories like this to life. Take a moment to explore our other videos too, and if this story moved something in you, leave us a comment. We read every single one. Thank you for being here with us.